Rise to Reign podcast. I'm your host, Amy Killingsworth, and today we are talking about the physical body. So if you've been following along with me, I have explained several times what the Rise to Reign framework actually is. Overall, it is a framework for healing your life. And so I've identified in coaching and speaking and working with teams and people for years on a variety of issues and problems and pain and hurts and suffering that shows up in life. A system, an overall healing system, life healing system. And what that is 7 pillars or 7 keys or 7 principles applied to 7 categories. And so we have covered the 7 principles prior to this podcast. I've covered all of them. Some of them took more than one episode. Some of them just took one episode. But the principles of the Rise to Reign framework are identity, sovereignty, amnesty, integrity, polarity, which is male, female, vulnerability, and generosity. So those are the 7 pillars of the Rise to Reign framework, or the 7 keys of the Rise to Reign framework. What we do is we take those 7 concepts and we apply them individually to 7 categories of your life. So if you have problems in life, if you have blocks, if you have things that are causing you suffering or standing in the way of you accomplishing your purpose or enjoying your life, it's going to fall in one of these 7 categories. So they are body, and then soul or heart, the Hebrew concept of heart, which is the human personality, which is a complex of mind, will, and emotions, spirit, relationships, finances, creativity, and calling. So those are the 7 categories of your life: body, soul, spirit, relationships, finances, creativity, and calling. So what we do is we take the 7 pillars or the 7 keys and we apply them to the 7 categories for healing. So remember, the tagline of Rise to Reign is God wants you healed so you can wholeheartedly live your purpose and love your life. So the calling is the last category, because as you bring these other 6 categories into alignment, your body, soul, spirit, relationships, finances, and creativity, your calling sort of just takes care of itself. What I see most often is people, looking for their purpose, looking for their calling. And the way to do that is to work on healing your life, especially your inner life, especially your emotions and your thoughts. And then the relationships and the finances and the creativity start, and the calling and the purpose start kind of taking care of themselves. So once you adjust the inside, the outside sort of takes care of itself. So I have arranged the categories in sort of an ascending order. So if you imagine a pyramid, the bottom, the longest and widest bottom of the pyramid would be the body. So we have to get our physical health and our physical well-being straightened out before we can really approach any of these other categories. Let me explain that. And that's what this podcast is really about. So if you're talking about like the next category, which is soul or heart, which is the mind, will, and emotions. Okay. And if we're talking about mental health, specifically like anxiety and depression, a huge contributor to anxiety and depression is in the physical health of the body. So we have the gut-brain connection, which is through the enteric nervous system, where in our gut, most of our feel-good chemicals, dopamine, norepinephrine, serotonin, are manufactured in the gut. So if we have a gut that's unhealthy, we're going to have a mind and a brain that's unhealthy. So that is a huge contributor. Gut problems, gut unhealth is a huge contributor to things like ADHD and anxiety and depression. And this is where I really got started in my career as an entrepreneur, is in health coaching. And so a big thing that people would come to me for a lot of the time is neurological stuff, because if you know my story, I had a son that had a neurological issue he was prescribed drugs, but the drugs came with all kinds of side effects. I didn't want to give them to him. So I found a way, and I sort of put myself through a crash course to find a way to heal him without drugs, with just food, lifestyle, supplementation. And then along that same time, I had a disastrous health issue and had to do the same for myself. And so as I began to heal the problems that I was experiencing physically, I noticed my mental state getting so much better, and anxiety resolving, lifelong, even panic disorder that I had been medicated for, in my teens and 20s, just disappearing. So it's just interesting to me how it's sort of like a mobile, like that hangs over maybe like a baby's bed. And there's a bunch of different pieces. And if they are tangled up, sometimes if you adjust like that, just that top bit, everything else sort of falls into line. So I want you to imagine the categories like that. The order we go in is very intentional. So when I do Rise to Reign immersion, which we have another session, I'm excited to announce we have a session coming up this fall. When we do Rise to Reign immersion, this is the order that we go in when I work with you as a coach, and when my team works with you on the Rise to Reign framework, we go in a very specific order, because we can't address the thoughts until your nervous system is physically calmed down. We can't address your relationships until your thinking is clear. So I hope you see how this sort of builds on each other. That's a lot of intro, because this specific episode today is about the body. And so I'm not going to have time really to handle it in the detail that obviously we do in our program and our practice, but I'm going to give you an overview of sort of what this looks like so that you can kind of begin just thinking this way. So you are a tripart being. It's super important to realize is that you have 3 equal but distinct parts to you. So you are a spirit. You have always been, and you always will be eternally. You're a spirit. But when you incarnate into the earth, you are given a body. So you have a body. You live in a body. Your spirit lives in a body. And then you have a soul, which is the Hebrew concept of heart, or the soul is like the mind, will, and emotions. It's like the complex of your personality, the human personality, your mind, will, and emotions. So you are a spirit, you have a soul, which is your mind, will, and emotions, and you live in a body. So today we're talking about the body that you live in, and we're going to apply the Rise to Reign framework to the Rise to Reign pillars to each category, and that creates like a framework. It's like a grid. We have a document, and across the top are the 7 pillars, and across the side are the 7 categories, and we actually go and apply them to each area. So I'm going to show you what this looks like in sort of an overview. So the first Rise to Reign pillar, of course, is identity. So the definition of identity is the condition of being a certain person. So my identity is Amy. It's also mom, a set of characteristics by which you're known. It's also coach. It's also consultant. It's also teacher. Like you get these sort of labels and monikers by which you're known. And there's a physical characteristic to this too, like your physical identity. You're female. You are tall, short. You have dark hair, you have no hair, like your bodily identity has to do with your physical characteristics and how you're known and how you're seen and how you see yourself. And it's also helpful to apply the archetypes. So the archetypes of identity for Rise to Reign purposes are the prisoner, the slave, the princess or the prince, depending on gender, and the queen or the king. So when we look at bodily identity, we want to ask ourselves, how does a queen treat her body? How does a king treat his body? And that's sort of the standard we apply. So how does a queen eat? How does a queen exercise? How does a queen supplement or make love? What does a queen move around in the world as a queen in her body? And so that gives you kind of an idea of the standard that applies. And I love the movie. You guys have probably heard me mention it before. I love the Elizabeth movies that Cate Blanchett played Elizabeth I, Queen Elizabeth, because there's this one scene and she becomes queen when she's like a young woman, like a teenager, barely. And she's the queen, and she's struggling to find her place and where she fits. And she's a female and she's got all these men that are, answering to her. And so it's like she's newly queen and she wakes up in the morning and here comes like the priest and he wants to check out her sheets because they're logging her bodily functions, and she's so offended by it. And he explains to her, your body is not your own. Your body, you're the sovereign, so your body belongs to the state, basically, and this is a matter of state. So she, that's a real wake-up call for her. But I love the concept of that, because when you are a queen or a king, you're very focused. Again, the pinnacle of the rise to reign pyramid or triad really is your calling. So when you are a queen or a king, you're very focused on your mission and you know what your purpose and your calling is, and you're focused on accomplishing that. And so your body is a servant to that, really. Is like it becomes not your own, and this is all throughout the Bible, is that like my body belongs to God and it belongs to Christ and it belongs to my purpose in the earth. And so the choices then that you make with your body are different than if you were maybe like a slave to pleasure or you were a slave to comfort. There's a scripture in the Bible where Paul says he beats his body into submission to make it do what it needs to do to get the job done, to get the mission done, to get the calling done. Now, I'm going to talk about this, but I feel like rest is really, really important. And I am not advocating that you beat yourself into submission in that way, because I think we can get way out of balance without resting and working from a place of not knowing who we are and trying to be significant and trying to produce results for the sake of being accepted or loved. And that's not what I'm talking about. What I do want to point out is the idea that when you recognize who you really are, the queen and the king are your true identity before you believed lies about yourself. So when you recognize who you truly are, how do you behave? How do you treat your body? It just doesn't become, like, shall I have that drink of alcohol or shall I have that donut? But it's like, what does this mean to the mission? What does this mean to my purpose? And what does this mean to my calling? Is this going to contribute to the energy that I need? Is this going to contribute to the mental space that I need to be in? And you just become intentional based on your identity. Another story that I'll share as far as identity goes is, I've shared it before, but when I was getting ready to need to go through some changes in my personal life and having to face the fact that I was looking at a divorce, I also had to look at the fact that the amount that I was drinking alcohol and how I was using alcohol to really numb some pain that I needed to feel so that I could make some changes that I needed to make in my life, because pain is always an indicator. So when you're in pain and when you're, quote unquote, suffering, that's just an indicator that something is out of alignment and something needs to change. But when you use a substance or an activity to numb yourself in that pain, you don't end up, or at least it's delayed for you to actually face what is needing faced, and that thing gets worse. So like if it's your money, and you just are not looking at it and spending on credit cards, eventually that's going to catch up with you and you're going to find yourself in bankruptcy. If it's food, if it's like the way that you're eating and you're not paying attention, and you're not looking at I'm getting ahead of myself. So I'm going to back it up and get back to the drinking story. So I had to make the decision to not drink anymore, to really give up alcohol so I could get sober and focus on what needed to happen. I knew that I needed to really like feel the pain that I was in so that I would have the tools and the motivation to make the changes that I needed to make, which were really, really, really terrifying for me. And I knew that if I had that crutch, if I had that numbing agent, that I, wouldn't do that. So I tried for a couple months, and I want to say I wouldn't consider myself like an addict or an alcoholic. I didn't go to any treatment or have any kind of withdrawal symptoms or anything like that. But it was an emotional tool that I was using. I hope you kind of can understand the difference. So a few times I was like, okay, I'm going to drink less. And then I ended up, drinking less for a couple of days and then going right back to patterns. And then I was like, okay, I'm gonna not drink tonight. And then I would go out to happy hour with my friends, and they were all having drinks, and I, loved my red wine, and I would be like, okay, I'll just have a glass. And so I kind of just did that, like haltered, like between, I would wake up, I'd have a headache, and I'd be like, never again. And then sure enough, like the weekend would come, and that would be what I did, would be to go out drinking, or not go out drinking, but you know what I mean? Like just, it was a part of my like social activity. So what I started to notice with self-awareness is that alcohol, when I removed it from my life, it left a lot of gaps. So it was my reward system. If I did good, if I, launched a product, if I had a win in my business, it's like how I would always like reward myself. Or if I got through a hard day, I would reward myself with alcohol. And it was also made me feel sophisticated. So I had, at the time, smaller children, and they were homeschooled. And so a lot of days I would have no interaction with other, adult humans other than my children. And so at the end of the day, after they were in bed, I could sit down on the couch and have a glass of wine, and it made me feel like an adult, like a woman, sophisticated. And that was, part of, I used that to bolster that identity. It also was I mentioned my crutch. If I was sad, it helped me feel better. If I was anxious, it helped me calm down, I thought. What I realized as I gave up alcohol and began to embrace sobriety is that it was actually taking so much more than it was giving in the form of energy and emotional backlash. Like when you drink for a moment, you feel good for maybe like 20 minutes, but then, it's kind of a downward spiral from there. You don't sleep good, you get dehydrated, you wake up with maybe a headache and just feeling yuck the next day, puffy, and it's hard on your liver, so it's like you think the benefits are outweighing the drawbacks, but they aren't necessarily. So that I realized that I had to get sober to realize that it was actually taking more from me than it was giving. So the way that I had to handle this is to decide that I wasn't going to drink anymore. I had to not focus on my behavior of drinking, because that wasn't working. I had to focus on my identity, and I had to anchor in an identity as a non-drinker. And so that meant that I made different choices, and it meant that I arranged my lifestyle. My whole social life was arranged around, going like drinking activities. And now, I do not care if people are drinking. I'll go out, I'll go, to happy hour or to parties or to, weddings. I don't care if other people are drinking, and I can have so much actually more fun sober than I ever did when I was drinking, because I'm happy now, and I'm integrated and emotionally well. So I feel good sober, and I don't want to mess with that. So, but in order to get there, when we are looking, like, especially like as a coach or a consultant, when somebody comes to me with a problem, we have to identify like where they want to go, which for me in this case, it was like, I want to not drink. And then we have to identify where you are. And then we have to decide on a plan or a strategy to close that distance. So I wanted to go from drinking basically, 2 or 3 nights a week and every weekend to not drinking at all. So how do you close that distance? Well, the way that I did it was to change my identity to a non-drinker, because, it's instead of I'm not drinking tonight, there's room for maybe I am, or tomorrow night, what's going to happen then? I had to really start thinking of myself as a non-drinker. How does a non-drinker behave? They don't drink ever under any circumstances for any reason. It's just not a part of who they are. So then I became, rearranged. I became able, I started to be able to rearrange my lifestyle to where I had a different reward system, and I had a different way to unwind at the end of the day, and had a different way to connect with my friends. And I got really into exercise, and I got really focused on my work, and I got really, really, really involved in emotional healing because now I didn't have a crutch to go to numb the feelings that were constantly trying to bubble up and be felt and seen and heard. So that is an example of how your identity as a non-drinker, or as a, you can apply it to exercise. Like, I consider myself a CrossFitter. Well, I'm not in any way like going to the games or having any kind of success as a competitor or anything like that. But I do it 5 times a week because I see that is part of my identity. I am a CrossFitter, so you, to close that gap between where you are and where you want to be, there's identity involved. And where your body is concerned, when you make bodily choices, how does a queen or a king treat their body? We're talking about food, hydration, rest. And I want to just tell you guys, I have a presentation. I'm not getting into the nitty gritty of health. I have a whole business on health coaching still. It's called Sovereign Wellness. And you can go to sovereignwellness.solutions and get information on that. I have a masterclass that actually goes over like the 5 pillars of health. It's based on reigning in life. So if you want details on like what to do with your health, go to sovereignwellness.solutions/masterclass, and you can watch a free presentation there. So I'm not getting into that in this podcast. I really just want to deal with the perspective and the framework. So your bodily identity is a set of characteristics by which you're known. It's a condition of being a certain person, how you see yourself, how others see you, who you really are, and then the archetypes: prisoner, slave, princess, queen. So the next pillar or key that we apply to the 7 categories is sovereignty. And I have so much to say about this right now in our current time frame of what's going on in our world, but I'll try to make it brief and let you come to your own conclusions, because listen, I am not here to tell you what to think. My goal here is to teach you how to think and how to be a powerful person. So when we're looking at bodily sovereignty, I'm not necessarily going to tell you what I think or what my opinion is, but I do really, really, really want to advocate for consent. So I did a whole series on it. When I did sovereignty, I did a whole series on it. And I did a separate podcast on the mechanics of consent. And that is so, so, so important right now. So if you haven't listened to that, it is episode number 4. It was released on June 29th of 2021. You can go back and listen to that. It's so important. So what is sovereignty? Well, it's supreme authority or rule over, in this case, over your own body. And it's also self-governance. So it's this concept, it's this robust concept of radical responsibility. So we're at a time in history where we really need to take radical responsibility for our health. And all of these government mandates that are coming down, that are forcing medical interventions, are inhumane. They're just not in line with sovereign beings created in the image of God. So if you want a medical intervention, if you want to take a certain therapy or drug or whatever, I bless you and release you to do what you have decided in your heart that is best for you. But what we have is a bunch of people who are just blindly following expert advice and not thinking for themselves and exercising sovereignty where their body is concerned. Because anything that, especially with like injection, anything that crosses the barrier of your skin, that is penetration. And it's actually penetrating into your body. That is in something that is forced and mandated to do that puts a different RNA or different proteins, different chemicals, different adjuvants and immunotherapy situations into your bloodstream that will be with you ostensibly for the rest of your life. That's a huge decision. And it needs to be one that is made between you and the Holy Spirit with discernment, and not by a governing body that just decides that everybody's going to get this therapy or this thing. So it's really, really, really important that you take radical responsibility for your health, because you can give your authority away, but you can't give your responsibility away. So you can say, well, the CDC recommends, or my doctor said, but if you have a side effect, if you have an illness, you're the one that's going to be in bed. You're going to be off work. You're going to be missing time with your kids. So don't rely. My point is, be informed, and it's very important to have consent. And if you give your authority away, that's your choice. Don't do that. But if you do give your authority away, understand that you can't give your responsibility away. At the end of the day, you will bear the responsibility. So that's bodily sovereignty. So bodily amnesty, the next ones are a little bit of more of an emotional aspect that we have in the categories. So amnesty is a robust idea of forgiveness, and the definition is to grant a general pardon to a forgetting of or overlooking of an offense or class of offenses. And again, amnesty is like a robust concept of forgiveness. So what does this have to do with your body? How do we apply amnesty to your body? Well, I love this topic because so many people are at war with their bodies. And if you don't believe me, especially women, go take off all your clothes and go stand in front of a full-length mirror and just listen to what your self-talk does. You will start picking everything apart. I know this because I live it. You know, your internal dialogue and your inner bully is going to be like, oh, you know, this is saggy and this is dimply and this is hairy and this is too fat, and this is too skinny and too tall and too what. And it's just, you know, criticizing and picking every little thing apart. Well, how do we forgive our body is to heal those thoughts one by one, you know, and offer those up for healing. Now we talk about, in the forgiveness framework, we talk about acknowledging the feeling. I feel like I'm fat or ugly or whatever your inner bully is saying, but I'm willing not to, and show me this from a healed perspective. So we really want to close that gap from bullying ourselves over our body. And it's not just appearance too. As a health coach, I meet with people that, you know, are struggling with things like infertility, or, you know, they're autoimmune, and they feel like their body is betraying them. You know, they feel like their body is working against them. And it's really, really important to forgive those thoughts. Your body never is working against you, for one thing. It's always working for you. Even when a symptom shows up, it's just a message that needs to be paid attention to. Again, pain is a messenger, needs to be paid attention to. But it's really important to be able to offer forgiveness and to process those thoughts and offer them up for forgiveness to the Holy Spirit, to be able to move past the criticism and the war, and sometimes even the hatred that you have towards your body, because that really anchors in physical illness. Okay, so integrity. What does bodily integrity look like? So integrity for our purposes is the quality or condition of being whole or undivided. It's an idea of completeness. For Rise to Reign, we say that integrity is the outside matching the inside, or telling the truth without manipulation. So where this comes into play is, what are all of the nagging little symptoms that you are ignoring about your body and your health? What are all the messages that your body is sending to you that you are not listening to, or that you're maybe just attributing to old age or whatever, you know? So this is, I got slapped upside the head when I was 36 years old. I was dealing with all kinds of stuff, like leading up to this. I had mentioned anxiety and depression. in my younger years, but also I had digestive problems and I was in pain. And as I started to have children and went through pregnancies, it was getting worse. I had headaches every day. I was on like 800 milligrams of ibuprofen just because everything hurt. And I was so inflamed, but I didn't really know what that was until I landed in the hospital after my third child was born with congestive heart failure. And they were telling me I had less than 5 years to live. And it was a combination, a kind of a cocktail of things I won't go into right now, but I had severe adrenal almost failure, insufficiency. I had a underperforming thyroid. It was a bunch of emotional and mental strain that I was under. And by the time it happened, it was too late. Now, thankfully, I have also, obviously made a miraculous recovery. Really, I would call it a miraculous recovery, and I don't have heart problems anymore. That was almost 10 years ago. But that's the kind of stuff that I'm talking about, is like with integrity, is paying attention to your body's messages without manipulation. So we manipulate ourselves a lot where our health is concerned. Like maybe you have pain, when you're urinating and you're, just like, oh, that's not that big of a deal. I'm not going to get that looked at. Or you don't go and get your, your exams that you're supposed to get, or you don't keep up with your healthcare regimen or take your supplements because, it just isn't that big of a deal. But take it from me, as you ignore those signs and those symptoms, it can become a big deal really fast. And by then, a lot of the times I don't want to say it's too late, but it's harder to deal with when left alone. So integrity is paying attention and being integrated and listening to your body and taking action when your body gives you messages. Okay, so polarity, where it comes to the body, is a pretty simple one. Polarity is the possession or manifestation of two opposing attributes, tendencies, or principles. For rise to reign, it's gender polarity, so it's masculine or feminine. So here's what I really want to talk about briefly with the body is this has to do with like, how do you dress? How do you move? How do you, again, like show up as a woman or as a man? And so that gives you can go back to the episodes that I did on masculine and feminine qualities and see, like maybe a dress with flowers on it would make you feel more feminine. Maybe if you put some essential oils on, that would make you feel more feminine. Femininity is also pleasure is really a feminine quality. So it's important for you to have pleasure as a woman. For men too, they don't usually have trouble being convinced of that. But women, it's important for you to have pleasure, physical pleasure, sexual pleasure. Eating a piece of chocolate and enjoying that is pleasurable. For me, it's being in the ocean is one of the most physically pleasurable sensations. I love swimming in salt water, and just, being in the ocean is such pleasure. So what is it that brings you pleasure? And you need to do that to really fill up your feminine tank. And for men, it is, whatever it is that brings you pleasure, that physical pleasure, mental and emotional pleasure, that it's important, obviously within limits, it's important to fill up on that and to identify with which side of the pole you occupy. So for a man, it might increase his masculinity to supplement testosterone. This is a big one that I see a lot in my health coaching practice, is when men start losing what they would consider like their libido or their virility, and they just need a little bit of testosterone supplements. Sometimes women need testosterone for libido. Seeing your natural healthcare practitioner about some hormonal balance goes a long way to helping you occupy your side of the pole. Hormones are huge in that. So I know I'm like just sort of racing through this, but I just want to give you a broad overview. Again, we're launching the Rise to Reign immersion that you can get in the coaching program this fall. So if you want to do a deep dive, we take you through it step by step. Okay, so the last two are vulnerability and generosity. And so those are, again, more like emotional non-tangible concepts. But as far as vulnerability goes, I'll give you the definition: uncertainty, risk, emotional exposure, the unstable feeling we get when we step out of our comfort zone or do something that forces us to loosen control. So, and vulnerability is not weakness, but it's our most accurate measure of courage. So how can you get out of your comfort zone with your body? I was just talking to a mom at my kids' school a couple nights ago, and I was like, you should come to CrossFit with me. And she was like, I could never do CrossFit. And, that's like, when I hear that as a coach, I'm like, if you can't do it, you must do it. So what is that thing that you want to learn to do? For me, playing tennis is very vulnerable because I'm bad at it. But I go and I, do the drills, and sometimes I do match plays, and it's way outside of my comfort zone. So is golf. I'm not very good at that either, but I love doing it because it's outside of my comfort zone, and it's something that I can do that it makes me vulnerable. It's if you're always doing the thing that you're good at, that's great. But if you can get outside of your comfort zone, that's where you grow. So how can you get outside of your comfort zone physically? It's really, really important. I'm always wanting to find my edge, because otherwise I'm stagnant and I'm not growing if I'm not finding my edge. So if I get really, really good at something, then I need to find a way to challenge myself, and that is bodily vulnerability. So the last one is bodily generosity, which is the quality of giving unselfish, usually to others. But in this case, we're going to ask, how can you be generous to your body? So that is, for me, I can tell you all the things that I do. I get facials, I get massages. In the categories of generosity are money, material objects, time, and then generosity of spirit. So, I love to do things like magnesium float tanks and baths and essential oils and supplements and good food and smoothies. And I see my doctor, my naturopath, regularly and make sure, get my blood drawn. And to me, there's not very many things that are a more impactful investment for your money than to actually spend it on your physical health. But if you don't have a lot of money, that doesn't mean you can't still be generous with your body. And that is, for one thing, it's time. Most people are in time famine, like, I don't have time to cook. I don't have time to work out. I don't have time. So one of the ways you can be generous with your body is to take the time to sleep 8 hours, to go to bed and in enough time to get enough sleep, to drink water, to, like I said, I love, you don't need a magnesium float tank if you live near the ocean. You can go float in the salt water. You can find free ways to be generous with your body, with your time, and then generosity of spirit. And then, if you can, treat yourself with a nice outfit or, an outing or an activity. That's also awesome too. All right. So my friends, that is an overview of the Rise to Reign framework, which is 7 pillars applied to 7 categories. And we also covered the first category, which is body. And we will be getting into the next category, which is going to be a series, which is one of the things that I'm super excited about because it's really my zone of genius, is emotional healing. So we're going to be getting into that next week. So thank you so much for listening, and I will see you next week.